The problem with postmortems for me is that you have to have footage of the game being developed in order to do them right and for it to be interesting. Guess what I don't have? Actually, there's a good reason for this. This was essentially my first ever game jam that I've participated. From now on, almost everything will be a dramatization of what happened. I've actually started by simply sketching out some ideas for the sprites, some player, ground, wall sprites. I had no idea what kind of game I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted it to be in orthogonal projection, akin to RPG Maker games. In the end, this kind of process gave me something to work with, and I spent the evening fleshing out my idea for the game. It was to be an adventure game where you control an unnamed person that has arrived to the village to investigate the disappearings that have been happening around. As you progress, the things get more and more strange. At the end, you end up meeting the mysterious force behind all of it, and the game ends. I definitely focused more on the world building. This time could have been spent better on sound and art department, as in some places they were lacking. I simply gave up on the sound and built a simple beating drum with reverb plastered upon it. Bad decision. I should have looked for some atmospheric pieces, something to build tension and allow the player to be surrounded by the world. Music is kind of a medium. If you have nothing to say, just shut up. As for technical aspect, I've used Godot engine for the first time and I was pleasantly surprised. The engine is super easy, especially coming from Unity. Unity feels clunky when you come back to it after creating something in Godot. Granted, both engines have their uses, but I don't know if I'll be coming back after this. There is one thing that almost screwed me over and my participation in the jam: Godot export templates. For some reason, the routing to the two mirrors that Godot devs provide is super dogshit for me. I can download them, but the speeds are in dial-up range. Fortunately, my friend has helped me out with this one. For her, there wasn't any problem apparently, and I was able to submit on time. Thanks, Marleza. For the more gameplay-centric part, there were two things that I had to implement and that are a bit strange to use. Dialogues, as the game heavily relies on text boxes, and doors. For the dialogues, I've created a separate scene and instanced it in the player scene. I was super surprised at the power that the engine just has implemented from the get-go. Ability to wiggle shakes simply by putting correct BB codes, even showing and hiding text based on the percentage you want to show is available to you. To trigger the dialogue, I simply sent a specific global event, dialogue start, along with the lines, whether or not the sound effects is to be played, speed at which to play the dialogue, and finally the script. Only lines argument is mandatory here. Process function is responsible for the typewriter effect, since the engine is super nice and gives us a way to do this without any workarounds. I'm simply incrementing the percent visible variable by the rate in percentage times delta. If the whole text is visible, simply set it to 100%, 1.0 in this case, and make the continue button visible. Else just continue on your way. If the sound effect is enabled, by default it is, randomize the pitch and play the sound effect. Player also has the ability to emit dialog process line event by simply clicking the E button. There are three actions that can happen here. If the text isn't fully visible, set it to fully visible and show the progress button. If we aren't surpassing the length of the lines, add 1 and prepare for the next line of dialogue. If we are though, simply emit dialogue ended event. And here comes the fucky wacky. Once we're done with the dialogue, we have an option to execute the script afterwards. This is quite useful to have, especially since you would want to set some flag, variables, or even some action to occur. These scripts have to be written in a very specific way, otherwise you'll get an error. Example of such script. If the game was bigger, it would get very hard to maintain these, I imagine. It's really not the best to do things like this, especially all I've ever done in these is either set some variable or conditionally triggered dialogue. Looking back at this, smarter thing would be to implement something like talk tree, for example, rather than Frankenstein looking thing like this. Doors are even more strange and have given me some trouble to get right. In my implementation, doors are just bunch of ifs when player interacts with them. We don't care about any of them. What we care about is the last one. This is actually what happens when you open the door. First, we emit transition out event. This will actually make the screen go black for a second when switching scenes. Turns out it's not only for aesthetic purposes. We put a yield with a timer here. It essentially pauses the execution of that script until the timer has elapsed, or as Godot names it, timeout event has been emitted. Next, we very quickly set whether or not the player needs to be teleported anywhere once we switch scenes and where. This actually mentions a specific door on the other side, but this can be literally any node for that particular functionality. Lastly, we load the scene we want. But how is the player exactly teleported once the scene is switched? I was thinking about this for a bit, and my workaround for this is just to check the teleport flag when the player controller is created and set the position to whatever I want. In this case, all doors have enum that defines where to spawn the player on the other side. Do you see why I was having problems here? I think my biggest problem with that is that I wanted to make all of the rooms separate scenes, and this ultimately has given me much more work than expected. Next time I would probably make less rooms or even make some of them part of one scene, maybe using some kind of fog of war system. In the end, I've had enormous amount of fun creating something dear to my heart, even though it's a steaming pile of garbage. If my super technical explanation and bashing on my own creation didn't dissuade you, you can find the link to Under His Spell in the video description. I've updated the game at the same time this video goes live. Think of it as 1.1. There are still many bugs. So yeah, thanks for watching.